Hello everyone, welcome to Everything is a Riot, where we reclaim the word riot as both an act of celebration and disruption. In this podcast series, we dissect the everyday structures of power through an anti-colonial, anti-imperial, and anti-racist lens, challenging the systems that bind us and reimagining what freedom looks like.
We'll explore how resistance is not only about confrontation, but also about joy, community, and the creative disruption of the status quo. Because in a world where power seeks to control, a riot, whether born of joy or defiance, becomes a vital act of reclamation.
1, 2, 3, 4.
And what did we have today again?
Today we had egg curry and we had adobo.
Over some rice?
Over some, good old plain
They're
white rice.
eating the dogs, they're eating the cats. Eat the cat, eat the cat. They're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats. Eat the cat, eat the cat. They're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs. Eat the cat, eat the cat.
So I think this is a very important episode for us, I feel like, to be recording, because I think a lot of the ideas that we hash out for our projects at Contrapunto, be it this podcast or the other logistic, administrative, editorial stuff, is often done around food. And I feel like we also came about as a group of people who love to break bread, who love to share a good meal, and that's what I think brings us together as a group. So it just reminds me of this little bookstore in Amsterdam that I was in a few days ago, and I was looking for a book on the patterns of rice eating in the Netherlands, and the woman at the bookstore told me that the bestseller in the book is this edition titled "You and I Eat the Same." So it basically talks about how you can look over fissures in like the ever-growing polarizing society through food, and how a lot of people are mediating differences through food, but that also means that it becomes an increasingly polarizing topic. So it's interesting to be talking about this today.
Yeah, food for me and for many of us is a expression of love and affection. Also, we cook for our family, friends, and it's also an entry to our culture, to our heritage, to our history. What we eat, what we make that food from, also is sort of representative of who we are, where we come from. And somebody like us who come from very different cultures, from different places, it becomes a entry point for us to let other people see what we are really made of, if you put it that way. Yeah. And food for me has been one of the ways I have sort of made friends, have sort of had very important critical discussions over. So food is politics.
Yeah. I think I only realized really the importance of food in my own identity, obviously after I moved out. And I was I was sharing a kitchen space with 5 other people from 5 other different regions of the world, and that came with its tensions and came with its happy moments, I would say. So something that I've seen change a lot in the time that I've been here and seen my identity being shaped by food and vice versa has been the restaurant culture in the city that we're based in, which is The Hague, which I think speaks also to the larger culture of restaurants around the world. And there is one specific kind of restaurant culture that really, really, really pisses me off, and that's why I want to really talk about it, is the uptake in this quasi fine dining restaurants that are like semi-affordable, meaning all kinds of people are supposedly that's supposedly accessible to a lot of people, And they cater themselves like that. They cater themselves around community and around like these little plates of food that you can share with other people. Yeah. But what really pisses me about these restaurants is that it forms itself atop a very like exclusionary eating culture, and it's in fact not about community at all. Wherein we were talking about this earlier, is that usually restaurant spaces or spaces like cafes historically have been spaces where ideas came together, where people came together, where people from all walks of life could sit down together, and you would hear about somebody who was from the other part of the town tell you about what's happening in that region or whatever. But I feel like the restaurants that we're more and more seeing take over the cities are very like exclusionary spaces, in the way that when you go into these restaurants, you pay, say, like a 50 euro fee almost, to completely cut yourself out from the realities of the city that you're living in, which is a very like, say, like a very, for example, Hague is a very diverse city, and people from all walks of life, all cultures. And then you enter, then you go into these restaurants and you pay like this amount of money, and it's almost as if they're catering to a European way of being inside these spaces, where there's a certain kind of ambiance, and you're not allowed to speak very loudly here, you're not allowed to laugh very loudly here, you're only allowed to eat a certain way, talk a certain way, and it's almost the trickling down of like this really posh fine dining culture into like regular restaurant culture that really, really, really pisses me off. So yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about that.
I think it's a bit hard. I agree with like I would say almost everything that you've said, but in this domain I can see why it can be like a sensitive sort of like touchy topic, just because it's hard to, let's say, criticize the culture of eating or the culture of gathering at dinners or lunches without seeing it as a dig at the overall culture of, like, I don't know, European countries, for example. But what I can definitely say does anger me just as much as what you have mentioned is the appropriation of other countries' food and manifesting that into sort of a exclusionary space where the organic original culture is not exclusionary in the first place. And that goes for a lot of restaurants that are like, let's say, pan-Asian, that serve multiple Asian cuisines at once in a very, let's say, as I guess you could say, polished space where people adhere to the regular European dining habits. And that juxtaposition is very, very, that juxtaposition is quite the thing to behold, because you are eating food that is meant to be shared, that is meant to be gathered around in a very boisterous atmosphere. But a lot of restaurants make these dishes single person dishes, which is not rarely existent in at least in my culture and the neighboring cultures around me. And yes, you're looked down upon if you, let's say, speak a little bit too loudly, when you laugh a bit too much. So that's something that really sort of bothers me, and it was a shock when I first came here. Also, with the fact that people here actually don't eat out as much as I experienced it to be, because one of the first local Dutch guys, really cool guy, but I used to be really just sort of taken aback by how little they ate out, because eating out to them is really for a special occasion, when you're willing to, let's say, flesh out
indulge
maybe a couple €100 for a meal, right? Whereas for us, eating out could be an everyday thing. Maybe you eat out twice a day, and you won't spend a fortune for it, right? And you can, it's an easy grab and go, or you in any sort of mindset you can go without having to worry about how you look, how you behave. So yeah, this is one of the things that I find really shocking.
Yeah.
To be fair, yeah.
So, I mean, I suppose food inherently, how we produce it, how we consume it, and how we present it has a class dimension. And what you're talking about is we add this. There's this surge in this added layer of regulation and sort of
Exclusion.
making it even more inaccessible to a large majority of people for certain aesthetics, because it caters to a certain the aesthetics of a certain class.
Yeah.
And of course, there is always this class dynamic to what kind of food is consumed or which class of people. And what you will often find in these spaces is a certain kind of food that is already inherently consumed by a certain class, higher class, elites, right? But as Shangbie was saying, there is also an appropriation of now, of various cultures. Working class meal is now being presented in a very,
chic way.
Yeah, chic way, with a certain aesthetic and with an added. And what basically they do is they just add certain values or inputs so as to make it even more expensive, which perhaps it might not be in its original form. So yeah, I mean, these are spaces of restaurants, cafes in its original form, at least from where I come from, also are spaces of engagement, or spaces of dialogue, or spaces of meeting.
But I think it
discussion.
used to be, but that's what really irks me or like rubs me the wrong way, is that, as Shangbie was saying, that obviously this is like, if we take a jab at their food cultures, that we're taking a jab at their larger culture. But I think I sort like a little bit disagree here, only because I think, for example, the French have had a very rich tradition of, like a very rich cafe culture. And the Dutch, for example, they have a really rich like bottle culture. Like they meet over drinks, and like they have like their little bottle snacks, whatever. And like that is also in some ways like a boisterous like meeting and gathering. But
Yeah.
I feel like that is being driven out by this like one global idea of like fine dining almost.
Yeah.
That is, yeah.
It's true. I think even for the global north itself, fine dining isn't an organic part of their culture, perhaps.
Yeah.
And I don't know. Maybe it is. People can correct me on this, but you're right in that sense that if people, I've been to a lot of, let's say, potlucks.
Yeah.
Or borals, as you said, or a lot of dinner parties at people's houses,
Yeah.
where it's predominantly by European friends of mine. And it's like nothing that we would experience, let's say, eating out at an Italian place, or somewhere else. Food sharing is very common, as you can see, in a more casual setting. So yeah, it's a bit of a.
So I think it's being like, I think that's why it's like it bothers me even more, is that it really feels like they're trying to push this idea of like as you said, like individual meals and a quiet meal, and that's just not the natural state of being. Like you're not supposed to eat a meal in silence with one other person across the table from like 3 little plates with like 2 little morsels of food. That's just not how food was eaten in any culture. So I think it's just not the natural way of being, I think.
I mean, how I see it is simply as the and a very abrasive commodification of culture, which manifests in a very exclusionary way, what you previously mentioned. And there is a certain layer of censorship of sorts, that how you behave, how you act, how you eat, because there is a certain class dynamics to it. I can come back to class, because eating loud or eating in a space where people are talking has a certain class dimension, and you sort of want to sort of filter and desensitize it out of that, its original sense, and it's pretty much commodification of a culture, food culture, in a very naked, brazen way. That's how I see it.
And I think as you said, it's like doubly angering, because it's not just commodification of any culture, it's commodification of cultures that the Western gaze already sometimes looks down upon. So it's a very like, yeah, it's a very paradoxical situation where you are, like, you have this orientalist Western gaze upon a certain culture, but you extract certain elements from that culture and then you commodify it and then you sensitize it and then you present it in an exclusionary, like, I feel like the restaurant becomes like almost like a very brazen rendition of like late stage capitalism, where you like perpetuating individualism, stealing from the periphery, pandering to the core. So it's really bothersome.
What worries me a lot is also that a lot of global South countries, or let's say countries from outside of Europe or North America, they're not free from this sort of view as well. I mean, I'm just gonna talk about a little bit about my experiences. I mean, I grew up in Hong Kong predominantly.
Yeah.
And if you know anything about Hong Kong culture or Chinese culture in general, eating culture is anything but about the compared to what we just talked about, the exclusionary, the independent, individual, exclusionary sort of way. It's extremely, extremely communal.
Yeah.
Dim sum, for example, everyone knows dim sum. When you go to a dim sum restaurant and it's full, and you go with, let's say, a couple of people that you know or by yourself, and there's no seats available for your group of people, you get put into a random table with strangers.
Yeah.
And you don't give a crap about what the other people are, the other strangers are talking about. They don't give a crap about what you are ordering, because everyone's in it for the food, to share, to have fun, to be able to be loud no matter who you're sitting next to, where you are. So, but Hong Kong is a place where you can see this sort of penetration of these sort of, I would say, exclusionary Western classist type of behavior, because you've got a lot of these restaurants that serve dim sum in an exclusionary way.
Yeah.
Where only the people that, let's say, the top 1% would go for their dim sum. But for what? It's not half as good as what the quote-unquote commoners can have. But you get served a nice little dumpling with little piggy ears and piggy nose there, you know. So this is something that really worries me, because and in China in general, this behavior is quite frowned upon by a lot of people, including me.
Yeah.
And we have a word to call these people who, let's say, have a normal, regular Chinese meal in a fancy way, and that's called zhuang, or in a very in a crude way to those who understand, zhuang bi, which means you're a pretender.
Yeah.
You're a pretender. You are in no means raised by that since birth.
Yeah.
To have a regular working class meal in a 5-star hotel where they serve the same bullshit, probably much worse, for 100% of the 100% markup, even more, right? But this is what we are seeing. There are people who frown upon it, like me, but there are also people who really adhere to this sort of lifestyle, even though they have nothing to do with it. They're not born into royalty.
Yeah.
You know, they're just regular people like you and me. But yeah.
No, here is the question, and this is what I'm building on what you said. I often am puzzled by the kind of food that, let's say, is deemed as, let's say, Indian or Asian, but the way it's produced and the way it's presented is not in its original sense. It panders and caters to a certain European palate, right? But then I ask myself, is it because the restaurants are creating these dishes and aesthetics for the consumer because the consumer wants it? Or is it the other way, that this pattern of, just taking the soul out of that food, and because that's why you don't have any access to good, actual, authentic food. So it's a dichotomy. I haven't come to the answer, but other than being exclusionary, the food you see from other different cultures in Europe largely, you don't find that in the original form. And you find it so watered down, so, like, for example, the Rogan Josh from the place I come from has been appropriated by Indian restaurants is not Indian food. Yet, what you consume, you cannot distinguish it from, let's say, a butter chicken or a regular
Chicken tikka masala.
regular meat curry from Rogan Josh, because perhaps the people who consume it don't know the difference between what goes into it, how it's supposed to taste, how it's supposed to look, and you will find it across. I call it the problem is that there has been so much proliferation of Indian restaurants, which produces pretty much a very homogeneous, very, I mean, there is a, if I have to term it, it is like the butter chickenification of Indian cuisine, in as if, like, you say Indian cuisine, the first thing that comes is butter chicken masala, or this thing, as if it is an erasure of a whole set of food dishes, and that's very,
it hits close to home.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about sort of this appropriation of food cultures, erasure of the original taste, we have, I think that we need to make a point about fusion food. And fusion food, I always think about fusion food, and for the longest time, as this very classist, exclusionary thing, because we have seen so many restaurants run, Michelin star restaurants that try to take very common Asian ingredients, for example, and add it to a like a Western main dish and call it fusion, and it's like a tiny portion, right? But fusion food can be also from the grassroots, and this is what we talk about. Just earlier, before we recorded this podcast, we watched a video on Indian Chinese food, for example. That's fusion, and it's not exclusionary. It's not. It's not classist. Everyone
it's because
can access
it's not manufactured. I think it's because it comes from actual migration trade routes, and it's not like one white man going to Asia once and going to China and India once, and then coming back to his Michelin star restaurants and I have all the wealth
all the
of
answers
knowledge.
exactly. But this is the thing about fusion food. I think that a lot of people do frown upon that term. If they think about fusion, they think about that miso, miso pasta. Pasta with chili oil.
Everything has to have an avocado now.
Everything has to have an avocado with
butterbean paste
with spices. So that's the stuff that probably we don't really want to support. But like in the Netherlands, for example, you've got two big immigrant identities coming together to form, or three.
Actually,
Chinese, Indonesian, and Suriname.
Yep.
And they make one of the biggest. They make the Dutch food culture.
100%.
What does the Dutch food culture have without these three countries?
Absolutely nothing.
Absolutely nothing. I'm sorry.
They have stampot and they have frikandel.
Frikandel. Harris makes a brilliant curry with frikandel and
It's
peas,
true.
and it's actually really good. So
It's
sorry,
really good.
sorry, Dutch people, you do have your stuff.
It's better than many other places, I can tell you.
Yeah. So, I mean, we can always have a optimistic lens, but of course, of the peripheral, let's say, cultures here coming to form a dominant.
But I think that's the problem, right? Because when you were talking about Hong Kong, and I think it hits very close to home, is then when you remove a people from the food, that it becomes a very extractivist process. For example, I'm talking about, I don't know how much of it we can put in the podcast, but I'm going to talk about it. But for example, in UAE, like the Arab world, like the Khaliji world, has a very rich tradition of eating communally, eating in one plate, eating together, eating on the floor. And I think in pursuit of their rapid globalization of the Emirates, they completely lost it, and they replaced it with a third culture that is neither European nor Arab nor Asian. It's just a third culture that is super quote unquote sanitized, and it's super classist, and it's a very extractivist process, meaning that you take the act of eating food that is supposed to be a communal activity, that is supposed to bring people together. I think one of the main roles of food, besides nutrition, providing nutrition, is to bring people together. Otherwise, yeah, I feel like a lot of food practices that we have today wouldn't exist if food was not meant to bring people together. And I feel like we're taking that away and like following suit with like liberalism and like individual rights or whatever, like existing in like silos. And I think that to me is very scary, to see the removal of a people from the very primal act of eating food as a community. I think that is very scary.
Exactly. I mean, food is a central aspect of how cultures were built around.
Yeah.
In its production, in its formation, what's available, or what could be eaten with family on a day-to-day basis, what could be prepared during let's say a celebration. Cultures were built around the idea of food. The society was in some ways, other than agriculture, which is component of food formation, making. Cultures were that, and what we are seeing is like taking away the soul of all these cultures, food cultures, and sensitizing it to a certain standard. Like it's the worst form of globalization that's happening.
Yes.
And in that process, I feel it is this shift towards what we are seeing anyways, because of capitalism and this neoliberalization process of everything, where everything has to cater to a certain individual palate, certain individual aesthetic. The communal aspect is
absent,
the cultural aspect is just completely taken out of it.
Yeah. But I mean, as you said, that food has made culture possible, and food has created identities, and it has. But I think we all know that it is not always it's not always been an easy fight. Food has also been like a violent marker of culture for a lot of communities. For example, you earlier alluded to the example of Rogan Josh, and in the bigger context of Indian food. First of all, the word Indian food, which is often thrown around in Europe, but also all around the world, as like, one of the best cuisines in the world, is to me a very false category, because if we are to talk about Indian food, what are we to talk about? Are we talking about vegetarian food that is often like touted as the primary marker of a good Indian in the Indian nationalist narrative? Or are we talking about food from all different parts of this very big state? Or are we also talking about food that exists in the territories that India exists in, or that India occupies? So I don't know. To me, it's also a very violent act. Like food can be a violent identity marker as well.
Yeah, I mean, as I was saying, there is this generalization of all kinds of food that are just put under this one singular category, and it just erases so much in that process. I was having a conversation with one of my friends recently, who mentioned to me, I was thinking of exploring Georgian food, and I was like, why don't we go to this restaurant? Mm-hmm. And she mentioned like, this is basically, they have used the name of one of the disputed regions title in their name, mm-hmm. and they are basically selling their food under a very nationalistic idea. Yeah. So, there is a certain nationalism attached to food making, and food.
But it's also been a part of resistance. For example, for me, one of the most shining examples of how I've seen like food being a part of like forming a part of like resistance and people identities has been Uyghur food. Like in the past couple of years, I've seen many Uyghur restaurants like come around the city, and like it kind of challenges the homogenous idea of like China.
But unfortunately, the Chinese diaspora or the Chinese immigrants did not have a say in what becomes popular
Yeah,
in their
yeah.
new host countries, right? I think what the majority of people here who are not Chinese think of Chinese food, they think of sweet and sour chicken, sweet and sour pork, fried rice, fried noodles, as if that's all
Yeah.
Chinese food is. But that's literally only from one region, albeit a big region, but one region of China. And you omit so many different cuisines from different religions and
Yeah.
different minorities in
Yeah.
China who are actually all willing to share their food.
Yeah.
But because of a certain palate of certain peoples, you can't share, let's say, Sichuan food, which has admittedly become more popular. But it's not what Chinese food is known for.
Yep.
Essentially, or people never associate, let's say, kebabs with China.
Yeah, which was quite a shocker for me, because when I had kebabs in
Yeah.
a Chinese place, they tasted very close to what they tasted like in the Uzbeki restaurant that we ate at. So
Exactly. So a lot of these things you won't see. So I don't know where I was getting at with
it's
my
okay.
response, but the central idea is that even if the immigrants do want to share more of their culture,
Yeah.
it still depends on the market. It still depends on the demand.
yeah,
And over the years, when the idea of a certain type of cuisine has been so ingrained, so, let's say, permeated into the host societies, how can you get out of that idea? I mean, there are so many Asian restaurants, per se, let's say, in the Netherlands. I don't even think the people who cook them believe in what they are cooking.
yeah, Yeah.
Like, how are you telling me that a person from Wenzhou, which is from the east of China,
yeah.
which has nothing to do with sweet and sour pork or fried rice, but they run a restaurant cooking this because why? Because that's the market. That's what people here believe what Chinese food is, and they have to do it to survive.
But that's, I think, what Harsh and you are both saying is that you keep alluding to this demand in the market, right? But this demand in the market was also created by a certain narrative. Like, it didn't just appear out of nowhere. And the same way, like, it's always really funny to me when I try like a French cheese and I'm not able to eat it. Like, the first response you will hear from a French person is always, like, cheese is an acquired taste, and like over time you're gonna like it. But I feel like we're not able to give that chance to in Europe, to food outside of Europe, because there is a certain, like, from every region, I feel like there is a certain dominant narrative that shapes what kind of food is going to become acceptable in the market. For example, for China, it was food, if I'm not mistaken, from the northwestern province,
So that has become
like more acceptable to
from the south.
from
Yeah,
the south.
yeah.
From South Asia, I would say it's this pushing of this narrative of Indian food that like often clubs Bangladeshi, Pakistani, Sri Lankan, Nepalese, and of like to a certain extent Afghan food as well. And within that, of course, there's as Haris was talking about, like, complete whitewashing of this like culminated culture. So I feel like there's like it's not as simple as the European market just deciding which food is acceptable to them, because as you see, like, people can, like, everything is an acquired taste. Like, you can develop a taste for everything. Like, now people eat like lemony, garlic, miso, gochujang, pasta. Like, it didn't come out of nowhere. Like, there was a certain narrative pushed and it became acceptable.
Just one tiny point, sorry, Harris, to cut you off there. But yes, of course, the acquired taste thing. But I've seen firsthand a cafe here from
Yeah.
Beijing, this couple from Beijing, wanting to bring Beijing cuisine here, which is the first of its kind, I would say, maybe in this entire country. And it failed within months. Why? Because it doesn't adhere to the common conception of Chinese food.
Yeah.
When they walk into a Chinese restaurant, all they want to see is fried rice,
Yeah.
fried noodles, chow mein, I don't know, maybe some Indo-Chinese or Surinamese Chinese food.
Yeah.
And if they don't see that and they see, oh, what is jjajangmian? What is the copper hot pot?
Yeah.
What's that? Oh, that looks weird. That's not the Chinese food that I know of.
Yeah.
Then they just go. So there is sort of this barrier. It's really hard. It's really hard. So that's what I mean. And this restaurant, guess what they're doing now? They're doing Korean fried chicken.
food,
They're doing
yeah.
Japanese bentos.
Yeah, of course.
And the only Chinese food they serve now is fried rice, is fried
Yeah.
noodles. But that's the only way they can succeed.
Yeah, because what Mariya was saying, that there is a certain narrative around food and food cultures, and if you don't pander to that culture, to that narrative, you're not going to succeed. I mean, on one side, food is a marker of your cultural, you embrace it, you embrace other people's food and culture, but you also sort of downplay other people through their food. For example, a very common, I would say, like a very racist remark around Indians is or for
Yeah, I was gonna prompt Harris to say something. You'll get back to what you were saying, but just like how Indians or South Asians in the West are commonly racistly remarked as Chinese, or just like how people that look like me, look remotely similar to me, are called dog eaters, for example.
Yeah.
And for me, that's fine.
They're eating the dogs. They're eating the cats.
Because I think if you're eating meat, any sort of meat, and you're judging someone for eating dog,
Yeah.
you are a absolute hypocrite. And I am one of those hypocrites because I eat meat and I would never eat dog.
Yeah,
but
yeah, no, I
I am
get it.
still a hypocrite.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, and there is a whole discourse around now. For example, if you go into this right-wing ecosystem on X or Facebook, they talk about why we should be banning halal food, for example.
Yeah.
And there is this, even a petition in the UK to ban
The use of halal food in schools.
exactly. Or I think it somehow is manifesting into banning kosher food also. The anti-Semitism, old classic, also comes into play. So food just not only brings cultures together, but it can also be sort of polarizing and identification of cultural marker of sorts, and can manifest in various forms of racist tropes around people and
like
cultures.
what better place to display that than the wonderful Republic of India, where I feel like this is always a shock for people when I tell them that people on the daily get lynched, get maimed and killed on the streets in India for consuming beef. It's always a shocker for a lot of people. So just to give you a little bit context, beef is predominantly consumed by the Muslim minority groups in India and the oppressed caste groups in India. And according to the caste system, which is pervasive in India, Brahmins that remain at the top of the caste system consider this food impure, and they ascribe a certain barbaric nature to people who consume this kind of food. And they also consider the cow sacred. So in pursuit of saving the cows, they have now killed like thousands and thousands of Muslim and Dalit boys. So yeah, food to me has always been a very like a violent notion. As much as I love the idea of bringing food together, to me it's always a very political choice to see what I can bring to the table, or what people I know bring to the table, and what their reaction to, as you were saying, Shangbie, to food can be, to what kind of food you eat, and what kind of judgment can be passed, and how much liberty can exist in what you are or what you're not allowed to consume. So to me, it's also in a lot of ways to be able to consume different kinds of food is also as like I would say like an act of empowerment, or like an act of liberation, as if I may put it like that.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very perverse form of gastro-nationalism, or culinary nationalism, in other words. But it also manifests in so many different ways. For example, there's a whole war about where does hummus originally come from.
Yeah.
Or there's a dispute over who makes the best jollof between Ghana and Nigeria, and who has made shawarma. The Greeks and the Turks are fighting about their own versions of
Doner.
Doner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Germany wants to, this is the funniest thing ever, but Germany wants to patent Doner as their own food.
Get out.
And I think Sweden or Denmark went into spiraled people there because when they found out the meatballs they consumed from the IKEA or from supermarket was of Turkish origin,
Oh my
which they
God.
thought was Swedish, I suppose,
Oh,
if I remember
no.
correctly. So yeah, I mean the kind of disputes over who owns this food or the cuisine or the ingredient that goes into making that food is quite polarizing. But I suppose going back to the beef politics in India, I think that's a very perverse version of that nationalism, and it's not just it's led to violence, it has led to destruction. It has become a tool to dispossess, marginalize and criminalize a whole population. And I suppose this is just the beginning of what we saw, what we are seeing in India against the Muslims as becoming the second-class citizens. It forms a very composite part of that process and project, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, it always like culture has always been very central to racializing certain populations, and I feel like food plays a very important role in doing so, like all around the world. So to bring it home, to pack it, as much as we believe in the idea of food bringing us together, as much as this podcast has been possible because we love eating food together, we have previously. Oh my God! Do you guys want to make any? You can continue talking. It's completely okay.
No, I was
don't
just saying how time really passes when
How
we're
long have you
having
been
fun.
recording?
Guess how much
Has it been 45 minutes?
It has been.
Oh my God!
Yes.
I cannot believe I could talk about this.
Maybe
for
the
so long.
audience is already bored at this point, and we're still yapping.
Oh, we love the yap.
Just to, I suppose I will end this conversation, this part of the
Yeah.
food and politics and culture. On this note, like I mentioned hummus. I almost
Hummus.
Oh, sorry, guys.
Sorry, guys.
I'm actually making the same mistake which once the Indian president Pranab Mukherjee made when he went to Israel on an official visit, and in his peculiar Bengali accent, went into the Knesset and talked about how much he loved hummus.
Oh my!
When he actually wanted to talk about hummus.
It's the first time we're using this, guys.
So that was a very funny foxfire, and sort of puts back food and culture and politics at the heart of a very polarizing subject.
And also, for those of our listeners joining in from the Netherlands, we would like to plug in a little project that we've also undertaken, which is bringing the act of bringing politics back into food by bringing people back into food, which through our efforts of organizing communal dinners around the Netherlands. Please... What the hell, man? Sorry. Huh? Am I tapping something?
Yeah.
Sorry. So please tune in on Contrapunto to stay updated on all our latest work and also to stay updated on what we do food related and otherwise.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.